How's it going, Exile? So this is my first build guide, and this is a very early build guide, so please understand I just finished the normal difficulty, so I'm like level 48 right now, and this build is getting me very far towards mapping now, because everything is alright, everything is figured out, and it's pretty easy to play from the very beginning. It's relatively tanky and everything. So one thing I want to say, I checked out some of the stuff Zen was posting, so highly recommend checking out that guide he posted in the description down below. A big shout out, especially because the energy reservation for casting the double comets with the skill tree, without that the build is really weak, so big shout out again here. Make sure to check out that video. So for this build, it's really pretty simple. Like, you always cast frozen orbs. Frozen orbs are gonna freeze everything, and then you have cast on freeze. So if you're still in the early game, cast on freeze is gonna trigger the cold snap, and that cold snap is just gonna explode the frozen enemies and deals huge AoE. Later, you're gonna have Comet when you have level 11 skill gems, which is going to be towards the end of Act 3. And you're just gonna replace Cold Snap with Comet, and Comet is pretty much doing, you know, whenever you freeze an enemy, it casts a comet from the sky, it does incredible amounts of damage, and it's basically a free cast. So it's this chain reaction: freeze mob, then cast on freeze triggered, cast on freeze, cast comet, comet destroys everything. On top of that, you can cast comet yourself, and we use frost bomb to do a huge amount of exposure. Exposure lowers the resistances of mobs, especially the cold resistance, to basically down to 0, so it gives us a very high reduction on the mob's resistances, and that's why this build is making so much freaking damage. On top of this, we use Ice Wall, which is a very strong boss killer. So what happens is, the larger the boss model, the more of ice walls, or frost wall I guess it's called, the more frost walls ice spikes are exploding directly. So the larger the mob, the more explodes instantly. And these do a huge amount of damage. And you can spam this ice wall pretty much in a boss fight. It doesn't have a very high cooldown, and it really helps you killing those nasty bosses like as fast as possible. Because this build, outside of ice wall and the comets you can cast yourself if you have another skill, doesn't really have the strongest single target damage. So you have big burst phases on single target mobs, but it's not for like sustained single target damage. But for the large boss models, it's absolutely fine. They're gonna die within, 10 to 30 seconds, no problem. And that's the short introduction of this guide. Again, we are still in figuring out this game, so a lot of this might change. Make sure to check the planner in the description down below. That's always going to be updated with the versions. It has an early game version and a mid game version. I don't have an end game version yet because I'm not there. So without further ado, let's just go right into the passive tree. Taking a look at my passive tree, I only have one ascension point right now. As soon as I get the second one, I will get this additional exposure here. But right now I have Arcane Surge because I really want to get a little bit more attack speed. And right now I'm still not having a good wand with attack speed. So that's just for that. If you already have good attack speed and just 1 or 2 ascendancy points, basically, you should get the exposure here. So for the tree, we pretty much go for all the spell damage here. We pick all the spell damage here: mana regeneration, cast speed, and this maximum energy shield. I really just pick for the 10 intelligence because I don't really play energy shield at the beginning. Then we go into the increased freeze and cold damage here. We get the spell crit here. And then you want to rush basically as soon as possible here towards the Endless Blizzard. So +1 skills on gems is the most important thing you can ever get. It basically gives you like 60% more damage or something like that. So whenever you get another skill level, it rises the damage by 50 or 60%. I don't know the exact number, but it's really important. So you can get obviously the cold penetration here, and I get this freeze build up. And then after that, you basically choose like these crit modifiers here, and this is even some more penetration. And then as soon as you hit level 40, 44, the last 2 areas of Act 3 in normal are gonna give you the rank 11 skill gems. So as soon as you have rank 11 skill gems, you can get your comet here, and then you need this one here. So you need this one little energy node, because comet is only give you 95% freeze, 95% energy. So basically what happens is you need to freeze 2 times to fire a Comet without having this 8% increased energy. So this is a very, very important note. Obviously, this gives some extra damage. And then, you know, once I have some more points, which I don't have right now, I want to go here into the Shattered Crystal because the Ice Wall is very, very strong against anything which has a large boss model, right? If the boss model is large, it gets a crap ton of damage from Ice Wall because it basically directly explodes. So that works on trash mobs, but it also works on bosses, and it really, really does a lot of damage. And with this, you're gonna reduce the life of those crystals, so they're gonna explode even faster. They're also gonna explode by your comets when they land on them, and so on. And yeah, I'm just missing this 2 points here to get this extra exposure. So that's the skill tree I'm having right now, and I will make an update once I get any further in the tree and we see what we get on top of this. So as for the skills, so once you're starting this build, you're not gonna have Comet, obviously. So once you're starting this build, your go-to is basically Cold Snap. Cold Snap is gonna explode frozen enemies and it's gonna deal a huge amount of AoE. So what you can do is you can play it with 1 or 2 ways. So you can play Frost Nova. I played this with Frost Nova, and just because I didn't really read that if you play Frostbolt, you can actually explode Frostbolts with Cold Snap. So you can shoot Frostbolts and then you can use Cold Snap and explode them. I didn't know that, so I choose Frost Nova. Frost Nova freezes much, much faster than Frostbolt, but it's also more melee range, so you have to be more survivability. You have to have a lot of life and stuff like that. But it worked out very well for me in the early game. Now, as I'm in cruel difficulty, I'm not using it anymore. So let's talk about the Frostbolt setup. So we use Frostbolt, and we use Scatter Shot really just to launch 2 additional projectiles, and we use Glaciation here for more freeze buildup. This is important because we want to run Cast on Freeze. So then we have our Cast on Freeze. So with Cast on Freeze, we basically, whenever we freeze an enemy, it's going to cast the spell when we reach 100 energy. And 1 freeze basically gives 100 energy in this setup. So I already talked about in the passive tree that it only gives 95, and you need to get this 1 little passive node to give it 100. So we're gonna use Cast on Freeze with Comet here, because that thing is just gonna do an insane amount of damage. And then we're gonna use Spell Echo, so we actually get 2 Comets. And then we're gonna use Impetus here for the 40% increased energy gain. So with this 40% increased energy gain, you gain 95, and then with this 1 node on the passive skill tree, you basically get 100. So every freeze is basically gonna launch a Comet, and that one is just gonna do crazy amount of damage. Then if you have a second level 11 skill gem, you also get 1 Comet which you can just cast. That is great for rares or bosses, because this has a little bit of a weakness against single rare enemies, because if you can't freeze them anymore, you effectively can't do any damage anymore. So that's where this second Comet comes into play, and we play that with Unleash, so we can just cast 2 in a row directly. And we play it with Invitable Critical, so it just has a 100% crit chance, basically. So because we are just gonna, you know, save this for rares or strong enemies, so we usually will have a very high crit chance all the time when we use that skill. Then we have Frost Wall. So Frost Wall is good for 2 things. The first thing is, you know what? You can get yourself out of trouble. Like, if you can see, like, mobs running onto you from, like, forward, you can just block them off with Frost Wall and then shoot your Frostbolts through the Frost Wall. That works just fine. Second, Frost Wall is, as I already said, incredible against bosses. So everything which has a large boss model, or a larger model. So there's small mobs and there's basically, let's just call it middle size and like large size mobs. And Frostbolt directly explodes on mobs which are kind of in this large state, and also it directly explodes on bosses. So this really does a crap ton of damage when exploding on bosses. So we use this with Concentrated Effect to even do more damage, because we really don't care about the area of effect. We mainly use this for single target damage. And then we use it with Spell Cascade. It's just gonna cast like 3 walls at once. And so if you cast those 3 walls and then you put your Comet on top of it, all the walls explode and they just do a huge amount of damage. So then we have Hypothermia here, just for, you know, cursing, and I use Heightened Curse here for more effect, and I use Magnified Effect for more area of effect here. nothing really to say about this. It's a basic curse. I would like to have something like increased duration, but I don't know. I didn't really find it. Maybe it's there, and no, I'm using increased duration actually on Frostbomb, so persistence. So you could obviously use this persistence here on the curse if you like. I use it on Frostbomb, but this is pretty much, you know, both lower the cold resistance. This one gives exposure. This one lowers cold resistance, and you know, either or is gonna last longer. So doesn't really matter where you put this, in my opinion. And then, yeah, your last skill is going to be Frostbomb. So Frostbomb is very important because Frostbomb gives exposure. So exposure basically makes mobs take more cold damage or lowers the resistance, whatever. I don't really 100% understand how it works. But basically, you always want to put Frostbomb on the mobs, so they die pretty much instantly when that is the case, because they get exposure and they basically get like most of their resistance removed by that. And then, yeah, we have persistence, so it lasts longer. And then we have strip away, which basically just makes it even more exposure. So this is like basically not for the Frostbomb's damage. It's really just to make mobs more vulnerable to your cold damage. And that's pretty much the gem choices. So I would say I'm not at the top, so I only have like one level 3 one here, so you definitely need like more of the smaller gem cutting things. But you know, it's gonna take a little while until we are there. Alright, taking a look at the gear. First of all, your weapon. Your weapon is your most important thing for doing more damage. So plus skills is the most important stat you want to have on your weapon. So you can either have a 200 stuff with higher levels, or you can have a wand and a focus, and you can get skill levels on both of them. It really doesn't matter. Wand and focus will have faster cast speed, so that's something I'm looking for, but I didn't find it yet. So I have this 200 stuff. I have had this for like a long while now, but you know, it's pretty decent. So try to get as much level of spell gems, and then, you know, extra damage stats are always good. And then the rest of your gear. So I would not recommend going for energy shield whatsoever. So at some point you obviously will switch to energy shield, but especially in the beginning, energy shield doesn't really scale that well. So I am basically going for armor and maximum life on pretty much all of my gear. So if you look at my gear pieces, I'm pretty much just trying to get armor items. I always want to try to get 1 resistance, and I always want to try to get max life. So as you look at my chest piece, again, I have armor, I have maximum life. This is actually a pretty bad chest piece. I have to replace this. And then, you know, the rune sockets you kind of have to do to, like, scale your resistances, because resistances are important. Then on my gloves, again, I have a huge max roll for life here, 97. And again, I have double resistance. So on your boots, just go for movement speed. Everything else doesn't really matter. I mean, everything else is nice, but get as much movement speed as possible. And then again, my belt is flask charges gained is a really nice stat. I feel like it's better than more recovery, if you ask me. And again, I'm trying to get maximum life. This has just some cold resistance, but I have a better one with life. But same story, I try to get armor and life on all my gear pieces. Then the charm you kind of pick, I would say, which boss you're playing. So I always change my charms before the boss. So if I die to a boss the first time, I look, hey, what damage type he does, and then I switch my charm there, really. And yeah, so for my amulet, mine is still like blue. I try to get 4 mana regeneration, but I guess ideally you can also get skill ranks on your amulet, I think, so that is going to be your focus. And for rings, again, I just try to get resistances, mana regeneration, that's pretty much it. As you can see, my gear is still not there, so we're gonna make an update on this once my gear becomes better. And then for the flask, obviously there's also something very important. So try to get the best life flask, and try to get increased amount recovered, and try to get increased charges gained. Those are the most important. If you're still doing long boss fights, you can get something which regenerates charges over time, but as soon as you get Ice Wall or Frost Wall, pretty much boss fights don't last so long anymore, so you can definitely go for one of these flasks. And for your mana flask, really I have the same stuff, amount recovered and increased charges here, but mana flask, you basically gonna spam, but mana is not gonna be your primary issue here. Alright, how do you get 60 spirit? Because I didn't really figure that out all that early. So how do you get 60 spirit? The first 30 spirit you get somewhere in Act 1, so you probably going to have them. So the second 30 spirit, you're actually going to get here. So Ignarduk the Bog Witch. So you go to the Azak Bog, and that's going to be a huge area, and this witch is somewhere at the outer perimeter. So you gotta kill the witch, and then you get another plus 30 spirit. So pretty simple, but if you forget about it, you're gonna have a very bad time. So rotation, this build definitely has a rotation. It definitely has two different rotations. One is for single target damage and one is for non-single target damage. So if you are out fighting, right, just don't stop casting Frostbolts. So you always want to move like this, right, and just cast the Frostbolts, because it's better to freeze the mobs when you reach them already than, you know, having the mobs to run in your face and then start casting Frostbolts. Because at the beginning, you're going to have slow cast speed, right? As you can see, it takes a really long time until I cast. So if a mob comes from here, where my cursor is right now, and you start casting now, once your Frostbolt is out, it's already going to be in your face. So you always want to try to, you know, kind of precast and get the mobs catched like in this barrage of frozen orbs. And then once you're in the fight, you basically have a rotation. Your first rotation is going to be Frostbomb. So you start with Frostbomb, then you go for Frostbite if it's an elite. If it's not elite, don't care about Frostbite. So you just start with Frostbomb, then you go for the frozen orbs, and then everything should normally already explode. So if you have elites or bosses, you want to do more single target damage. So what you're going to do is you're going to start with a couple of frost, then you start with your frost bomb, then you do your curse, right? Frost bomb, curse, then you do your comets. So bam, bam, bam. Then you start casting on him, and you can always do frost walls if it is a large model, right? If the boss is large, you can always spam your frost walls on them. And I'm looking at the video right now. It really just does like a huge amount of damage, and that's your number one priority when fighting bosses. If you're just fighting elites outside or something like that, you know, always, if it's not a large model, frost bomb, curse, and then you launch your 2 comets, and usually it's gonna be dead. And if not, you know, you can continue to spam your frozen orb here.